Well, hello everyone. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. My name is Nicholas Reid from Reid Corporate, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this investor webinar with Patriot Battery Metals on what is a very significant day for the company. We appreciate you joining us at relatively short notice. The company has just announced a very significant investment, offtake and strategic partnership with Europe's largest car manufacturer, Volkswagen. A move which will propel its key project significantly towards production. It's my great pleasure this morning to welcome Patriot's Managing Director and CEO, Ken Brinsden, who's just arrived in Sydney and joins us this evening, as well as Patriot's Head of Investor Relations, Olivia Caza-Lapointe, who joins us from Canada. We're delighted to have Ken make himself available at such short notice to run us through this very important announcement. Just a quick pointer as to how this evening will proceed. Ken will run us through the announcement and the transaction with a short PowerPoint presentation, and we'll then open the floor to questions. Importantly, this is an interactive session, and we would like to put as many questions as you have to Ken and Olivia to respond this evening. So Ken, look, thanks very much for joining us. It's obviously the market's just opened in North America. Fantastic news for Patriot. What an amazing way to finish the year. So please take us through this incredible transaction.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. Fantastic to be with you, and a pleasure to be joined by Olivia. Thanks also for joining the call. Olivia is a great resource for all shareholders and analysts, and I encourage you to either make contact with him or with me. And especially as we explain the rationale behind what we've been up to, Patriot, in respect of the Shaakichiuwaanaan project, its development credentials, in attracting such a powerful strategic partner as the combination of VW and PowerCo, and that's really the objective of the call, to help explain what we've been up to and why we imagine this is such an important step forward for the company. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining. Both Olivia and I really appreciate your participation. Let's say 10 to 15 minutes worth of presentation materials, and hopefully plenty of time for all those questions that I'm sure are pressing in everybody's minds. We look forward to being able to answer them effectively on this morning's call as well. For Australians, you might be wondering about the time in respect of the call, and I completely understand that line of inquiry, but from our point of view, a very important representation of a step forward for the North American supply chain. And I believe that to be equally true in respect of VW and PowerCo's objectives. So hence the timing of our release and the timing of these calls, very much focused on North American markets, but in particular, how we imagine it represents a really key step forward for supply chains in those jurisdictions. So let me talk you through the materials. You'd be aware of our forward-looking statements. Please make reference to them on our website. These presentation materials are lodged there and also on the respective platforms. Okay, well, where to start? Such an important step forward for Patriot in the relationship that's been growing and culminates today with PowerCo and VW. VW being one of the preeminent car manufacturers globally, but in particular with respect to the future around EVs, EV manufacturing, EV sales. And then PowerCo being 100% subsidiary of VW, focused on cell manufacture. The combination of those two brands is a really important element of our rationale around where we take the project, strategic partners being aligned with respect to the project, and what they represent for the markets that we imagine we will effectively participate in. We've made no secret of our objectives in being a raw materials project that is focused on Western markets. The presence of the Shaakichiuwaanaan project in North America and its proximity to Europe means that we have a really powerful position with the scale and the grade in the project at Shaakichiuwaanaan to be a key supplier for those markets. So we've been deeply engaged with industry to see how we could ensure we attract the right partners to the project, but in particular, those that have a similar or a like mind about the future of the industry. And in VW and in PowerCo, we're confident that we've found that common purpose in terms of being focused on those markets, and that culminates in today's deal. The deal comes in a couple of different parts, and I'll come back to each of them to describe it in a little bit more detail. But broadly speaking, a combination of investment in support of the project's continued development, and that'll be closing over approximately the next 2 to 3 weeks. Also, a forward-looking reference to investment and or funding support for the project. So as part of today's dealings, we've established a window for PowerCo to support our final investment decision, and then to reconsider the combination of financing and offtake in addition to today's offtake. Then, of course, the offtake that's matched to this early stage investment in the project. And lastly, an MOU that contemplates the common objectives, very much aligned with that thesis I described earlier, the common objectives that we see in building out the future of supply chains for the growth that we all imagine, that being Patriot, VW and PowerCo, is going to occur in North American and European markets. So it's an all-encompassing deal, a basic premise. VW and PowerCo are moving from paddock to plate. They're looking to be established all the way through the supply chain, including their first investment in direct investment in lithium raw materials. So yeah, we're very proud and pleased to be part of VW's future in those key markets. Why do we do it? Well, I've already touched on some of those key points. Clearly, we require funding to continue to support the project's development, and the combination of VW and PowerCo have come along to help support that objective. The funding assists in the progress of the combination of our feasibility study and the associated environmental documentation that's encompassed in the ESIA. This funding round will take us well past the submission of those two documents in the September quarter of next year. I'll come back to the timeline for the project during the latter part of the presentation. Then, of course, there's the offtake. It's modest in scale, at least in respect of this first stage. So 100,000 tonnes per annum of spodumene concentrate. In the scheme of things, not a huge amount of concentrate, at least not as we imagine what ultimately happens at Shaakichiuwaanaan. So in the stage 1 project, it's 100,000 tonnes of a total of 400,000 tonnes production. But once we've expanded into stage 2, 100,000 tonnes of a total 800,000 tonnes. So in our view, leaving plenty of room for future growth in offtake relationships, of which it seems likely VW and PowerCo will be an important partner for the future of growth in spodumene concentrate. And it's possible that comes through the commitment that we've made to review the FID funding package, but in particular, providing a window for VW to participate in the final investment decision funding round. It's to be agreed, but nonetheless, an important signal from VW in respect of their support for our project, and for that matter, for Patriot to also recognise that funding, the potential in that funding, and growth in future offtake positions. So to be determined, but I think a strong statement from VW about what they're prepared to do to continue to support the project's development. I think this is a key theme that I'd hope you'd be able to take away with you today. The MOU, well, the MOU is again another, it's slightly more all-encompassing. It's to say there is a lot of work to be done in the establishment of these Western-facing supply chains. I don't think you'd be putting too fine a point on it by saying that there is already significant concentration risk in respect of the front end of the lithium raw materials industry in and from China. China is clearly a dominant player. And whilst they've been very successful in building a successful lithium-ion supply chain, I think it's fair to say that Western players in the market recognise there should be, and likely will be over time, further diversity in those supply chains. So what this MOU contemplates is what we can do to continue to work together to expand the supply chain so that it supports the growth ultimately what we expect to be North American and European demand. So in our view, that's also a really important point to be made in respect of today's dealings with VW and PowerCo. Lastly, VW themselves and what they're already doing in support of the future of mobility. And a lot of that is centered on EVs. Of the Western EV players, they are the second largest, and they have very, very strong ambitions, but in particular, through the growth that they imagine is going to occur in North America and to a certain extent in Europe. So that means there will be a lot more investment in the supply chain. Some of that starts already, or has already started, certainly in the latter parts of the planning phase, to build significant capacity in Ontario. 90 gigawatt hours is ultimately proposed for the St. Thomas facility in Ontario. And you know, we would suggest, and I'm sure VW sees it the same way, that Shaakichiuwaanaan will be an important part of ultimately supplying raw materials and value-added raw materials to those facilities. Not necessarily just Ontario, because they already have substantial development underway in Europe as well with respect to the future of cell making capacity that'll make its way through to VW's EV making capacity. So on the strategic investment, VW, that is through their financing vehicle, will own 9.9% of Patriot. They're subscribing for shares at a significant premium. And I think that's a vote of confidence in the direction that the combination of the Shaakichiuwaanaan project, but equally the company takes as we seek to develop the Shaakichiuwaanaan project, which is being recognised through this deal as the premier, or if not one of the premier assets in North America. It's fair to say that you know, of course, VW has done extensive due diligence, as you would imagine, for a significant deal like this, and they've come to the conclusion that it's a key one to back, but also to back with strength. So clearly, that is a really important piece of recognition for the combination of our project being, you know, large scale, very high grade and well located, but equally in respect of our team and the strong work that's already been put into this premier project. So a ringing endorsement for the combination of the project itself, but also the team. And I'm really proud of the team's efforts and how far they've taken the project in a relatively short period of time. It is fantastic. So strategic investment, significant premium, recognition of all those things that are important about the Shaakichiuwaanaan project. Moving on to the offtake. And in respect of the offtake, it's relatively straightforward. 100,000 tonnes per annum during the process of stage one project capacity being 400,000 tonnes, so about 25% of the stage one capacity, or 12.5% of this combined stage one and stage two capacity at 800,000 tonnes per annum. In respect of what ultimately happens with that spodumene concentrate, that's going to be the subject of a lot more discussion and also future work by PowerCo as to ultimately where that product makes its way. But in any case, the MOU also contemplates Patriot and PowerCo working together in respect of how we imagine this supply chain can unfold. And I really can't think of a better partner to be working with. They genuinely fit the bill of being a key strategic partner in the supply chain as a very, very strong end user, but a sophisticated player with deep knowledge of the markets within which we're all participating. So from our point of view, a very important piece of the puzzle in bringing on our first offtake partner, but equally VW and their first investment in lithium, directly in lithium raw materials. So yeah, again, a really important endorsement of the project and the team. In respect of the offtake itself, just to provide a little bit more detail, pricing is captured through lithium chemicals pricing, and that's motivated principally by the concept that the chemicals indices carry a bit more volume in terms of price input, but that is also cross-checked against spodumene pricing through a basket of spodumene price references. And the logic in the model is that whilst headline prices will follow the chemicals indice, it's being checked against spodumene to make sure that the two are not moving too far apart from each other. So nothing particularly different or necessarily, let's say tricky in respect of pricing, just ensuring that the spodumene price ultimately matches directionally where the market's at and in absolute terms where price is at. It's 10 years worth of offtake. And when you think about the scale of the Shaakichiuwaanaan project, that's also an important element. The mine is likely to be around for many, many decades to come. So having an important cornerstone player to the first round of offtake, and especially at this relatively early stage of the project's development, we're in the feasibility study, but nonetheless, the feasibility study is not yet complete. Having VW participate at this relatively early stage provides a really strong endorsement again, in respect of the project, and for that matter, the sorts of capacity that can be won over time. So that's the offtake. In respect of the future around funding, I glossed over that. But if you go back to the concept of how VW and PowerCo are viewing our project, one of the additional points that I would make is to say that, yes, they're providing funding in respect of investment, but in return, first rounds of offtake. There is also the concept of them participating, subject to more discussion, but participating in the final investment decision funding round. And we look forward to obviously completing the feasibility study, all of the engagement that would go on with respect to the project of progress approvals, including the engagement with the CRE. And at the time that we launch a final investment decision or a funding round, VW have been provided with the opportunity to link cornerstone funding in respect of the FID to a further round of offtake at that time. So nothing definitive other than the fact that VW and PowerCo have a window to provide that funding package, and should it be agreed, commensurate offtake, potential commensurate offtake to match that round of funding at the FID stage. I hope that makes sense. Okay, moving on. We've discussed the offtake. So in the end, the other element of the project is the MOU. And the MOU is designed to provide a collaborative and consultative approach to the continued development of the supply chain. What is it that we can do to work together to see this Western-facing supply chain emerge in a way that today is very much in its infancy? So like minds, working together and ultimately either end of the supply chain, i.e. an end user in the form of PowerCo and VW, but equally us as a raw material supplier, and doing a good job of interconnecting that Western-facing value-added supply. So raw materials, as presented by the Shaakichiuwaanaan project, but equally value-added chemicals, how we could work together to support those objectives, cathodes, and ultimately cell-making capacity in the form of PowerCo. So yeah, we feel that's another important element in respect of today's deal, basically capturing the opportunity in what's yet to develop with a view to growing Western supply of those key value-added chemicals to North American and European markets. Okay. Lastly, just a reminder for the phased development strategy. So taking you back to our PEA and as currently under consideration in the feasibility study, we haven't changed the model. The logic is that there will be a stage development at Shaakichiuwaanaan. Stage 1 encompassing 400,000 tonnes per annum of spodumene concentrate, and stage 2 doubling that capacity. The stage 1 capacity is ultimately where PowerCo will receive their 100,000 tonnes per annum of spodumene concentrate, and there'll be a discussion down the track that considers the potential for more offtake with a commensurate funding package in support of or cornerstoning the final investment decision funding round for the commencement of construction. Okay, how does all that unfold? Well, in respect of our timeline, nothing has changed. We've made a lot of progress in a relatively short period of time. It's worth remembering that to get to this point in time, but in particular to be presenting the combination of a feasibility study and the ESIA documentation, you in essence have to have been already doing 3 years worth of field study, drilling, and of course whatever engineering or feasibility elements grow your database for the presentation of a feasibility study. So it is clear that Patriot and our Shaakichiuwaanaan project is now pretty well advanced, to the point where we affirm the presentation of the feasibility study and the ESIA, targeting the September quarter next year, and that kicks off the COMEX review process, which will ultimately facilitate the mine approval or mine authorization, which we expect to fall out approximately 2 years later. In the intervening period, we'll have obviously continued with our engagement with the CRE and the progress of an IBA. We'll be working on the final investment decision or detail engineering and final investment decision, of which we expect an important conversation with VW in support of that funding round. And then ultimately, we move into construction, late 2027 through to the end of 2028, at which time we'd be commissioning the project and ramping up production from 2029. Reminding everyone that by the end of the decade, consensus view is that there will be, and it's hard to imagine based on today, especially today's investment thesis around mining activity, that the world is not going to be short lithium raw materials at that time, on the expectation that there will be continued substantial growth in demand, of which important subsets will come out in North America and in Europe. And we feel the combination of Patriot, the quality in our Shaakichiuwaanaan project, combination of scale, longevity, and very high-grade subsets of the resource, its key location in Quebec and North America implies, and especially now with the consortium approach, investment of VW, offtake with PowerCo, that we have a really powerful consortium to support the growth that we expect to come from those key markets. And I think that probably summarizes the key position that we've announced today. And Nicholas, I'm sure there's going to be some great questions amongst our listeners today. So I look forward to having a crack at answering them.
Thanks very much, Ken. Appreciate that run through. And we've got a lot of questions that are popping up already, but just a reminder to everyone, please use the Q&A portal on your the right-hand side of your browser to log your questions. Ken, a couple of emails came in just before we started, and I might just deal with those first. The first one was, can you give us a comment about the timing of this investment, given it appears that there were no immediate financing needs and that your latest cash balance could carry you through to a feasibility study? Why this transaction now versus potentially waiting until later next year?
Yeah, completely understand the question, Nicholas, and appreciate where it's coming from. I would simply say that in your engagement that's going on with industry, there's no such thing as really a short conversation. You can only imagine how much work has gone into the combination of due diligence, respective reviews, whether it's on the VW PowerCo side or even from our point of view, being the Patriot side and assessing VW and PowerCo as a partner. That doesn't happen overnight. And therefore, it's not necessarily that easy to be timing your run to ultimately raise the money. So that, combined with the healthy premium that VW is happy to pay in respect of their participation in our business, means that we should do the deal at the time that it's ready to be done. So I think that's probably about as clear as I could be in respect of that question. It's not so much a question of timing the market. It's ensuring that you've had fulsome engagement with industry and facilitating, the relationship as and when it arises, as compared to being, it's trying to time the market.
Thanks, Ken. Another question on the offtake. Can you please comment on whether there are any floor or ceiling mechanisms?
Yep, no, again, a good question. And the answer is no. There is no floor and no ceiling. As you would expect, there is the standard terms and conditions that would relate to a couple of other key events. Firstly, the conditions precedent, that ultimately there is a mine approved and there is a mine constructed to facilitate the offtake itself, of course. And also, in the event that market conditions imply that it's no longer, making sense to actually produce a product, so-called, difficulties or hardship clauses. So you would like to think that everybody is protected in respect of the sort of classic terms and conditions that sit around an offtake agreement. But no floors, no ceilings. Just a reference price.
Thanks for the response there, Ken. Let's jump into some of the online questions. Does this deal restrict you with potential other strategic investors? In other words, do you envision securing multiple strategic investors? And what other financing or partnership objectives would you like to accomplish in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, consistent with, I think what we've shared in the public domain historically. I'm recalling some key slides that arose in our PEA. It was fully our expectation that industry would be key to continuing to fund the project, and hence, we're both pleased and proud to be working now with VW and PowerCo, because they clearly fit that bill. The idea that industry itself is going to continue to support projects like ours because of its importance to underwrite investments downstream. And I think that today's deal is really just further evidence of that and affirms that objective. But other than that, in terms of additional funding, well, it's conceivable, yes, that there is other counterparties that we could engage with. But suffice to say, the support that VW and PowerCo have shown us indicates that they're a logical counterparty to continue to work with from here, and to be the first port of call. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't deal with others. I'm not suggesting that in the slightest, but it's an important relationship and one that we're looking forward to continuing to grow.
Okay, thanks very much, Ken. Our next question, apart from congratulating you on the announcement, the question is, the press release mentions that the adjustment of the offtake pricing for investment done by PowerCo. How should we think about that? And is the goal for PowerCo and VW to recoup the value of the investment through these adjustments?
No, I don't think you should think of it like that. What we're really implying is that to derive a spodumene price from a chemical price, you obviously have to include modifying factors because, roughly speaking, the value in the spodumene could either be, 6 to 10 times you could multiply the value in the spodumene 6 to 10 times to equate to the value in the chemical. So clearly there has to be some modifying factors. That's really what we're referring to there. You in effect, you are pro-ratering down from the headline chemical price the value in the spodumene itself. So that's what we mean by modifying factors. In assessing that, we're also testing that against the basket of spodumene prices. And I think I alluded to it in the presentation portion. We're basically checking that there is relativity between the chemical price and the basket of spodumene prices, so that at different points in time, the market doesn't get the price derived using those modifying factors doesn't get too disconnected from the spodumene price. So to be clear, I don't really think that you should think about modifying factors somehow relating to the original investment. That's not really the way to think about it. It's just that to get to a spodumene price, you have to apply modifying factors to get from the headline chemical price. Last point, the main reason for using the chemical price is obviously to assist PowerCo in their assessment of the value in the combination of the chemicals versus the spodumene. But it's also a more liquid index and therefore should ultimately be a better price print. One more key point. It's possible that there is more evolution of markets between now and the time that we commence supply. So the agreement also facilitates the opportunity to discuss how the market has evolved in the intervening period, to consider whether an alternate structure might make sense. So it's not necessarily fixed, but we are taking a view today. You can price the spodumene from the chemical price, but that might change over time.
Okay, thanks, Ken. That's a detailed answer. There's a follow-up question from the same investor. As it relates to the chemical conversion currently, where does PowerCo currently expect that to occur? And how serious are they about developing this locally in Canada?
Yeah, it's going to be the subject of a lot more discussion. And I don't think that PowerCo would say today that they have a definitive view. It's going to have to be the subject of more discussion. But when you think about, the time between now and the commencement of our mine supply, it's also possible that there's a hybrid solution in amongst it all that deals with existing capacity somewhere around the world. The objective in the MOU is that we very much keep the conversation live about where, in fact, chemical capacity should go, and working together to see if there's useful solutions through our relationships, i.e. as a raw material supplier in the case of Patriot, but equally PowerCo and VW as an end user. What do we see as opportunities to continue to build this Western-facing supply chain, and where should those chemicals go? So, yeah, nothing definitive yet. Going to be the subject of a lot more discussion. But hopefully some useful developments for Western supply chains as part of this healthy relationship.
Okay, thanks, Ken. We've got a question here from an analyst here in Australia. How often is the spodumene price assessed and reset? Is it monthly, quarterly, or annually?
Well, I won't go into the detail. That's quite a detailed question. The logic in the model is that you're using, as I said, using the headline chemical price to derive a spodumene price. Therefore, you're pro-ratering the value in the spodumene. We have the opportunity to assess that on a semi-regular basis. I won't give away all the terms, but basically often enough that either side, i.e. the buyer or the seller, are not going to find themselves in a difficult position for a disconnect that's emerged in the market. So between the two counterparties, we've worked out what timeline we think is relevant to assess that. Not very frequent, but equally not that long as well.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Our next question is, did you or VW consider a project level investment like Mitsubishi did at Frontier and GM did at Lithium Americas?
Yeah, look, in this particular case, I think the answer we could supply is to say no, not really. But we have received approaches historically to consider such a model. Now, we would take the view that it's definitely worth considering, but equally you should make sure that if there is a deal to be done at a mine level, that it equally makes sense for shareholders, because once you've sold a portion of the project, it's gone, it's gone forever, so to speak. So I think the answer is, well, in this particular case, not necessarily, but we have received approaches like that historically, and yes, of course, we would consider such a model, but in the end, you just want to make sure that it's the right thing for shareholders for the long term.
Okay, thanks, Ken. I'm just going to take another email question that came in earlier. Will this transaction with VW influence the project timeline and more precisely the beginning of operations?
Well, at the very least, it is a significant step forward in support of the funding of the project. You can surely take away that an organisation the significance of VW, and I want to say PowerCo as an off-taker, is a very strong endorsement of our project. And I think that the implication you could draw from that is that definitely helps from a funding point of view. So yes, of course, VW has taken a strategic stake today, but equally they've done that knowing full well that we still have more work to do to ultimately fund the entire project. And they've provided a strong endorsement to indicate that they're going to seriously participate in that process, or at the very least put their best foot forward to continue to support the project. So yeah, we feel like that's a very strong endorsement. Does that help with respect to the timeline? Well, I can assure you it's supportive to the timeline, but could you be definitive about acceleration? I don't think so, not necessarily. But does it put a big tick in the box to indicate you've got strength and the consortium is a very strong consortium that ultimately builds the project? I think the answer is yes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ken. The next question here is whether you can offer any comment on PowerCo's battery facility in Ontario. How advanced is it? Is it currently producing, and roughly what is its current capacity?
Yeah, it's in late planning stages, and PowerCo already has a substantial presence in Ontario for sure. Ultimately, there's 90 gigawatt hours of capacity, which is a very, very substantial cell making facility by global standards. It's right up there. Olivia, I don't know if you want to add anything else there to add to the St Thomas facilities? Sorry, mate, you're either on mute or we can't hear you.
Sorry, Ken. Yeah, the 90 gigawatt is certainly the biggest facility for PowerCo out of the 3 that they have planned currently. And to your point, I think you're bang on terms of where they are at with the planning of the factory. I think I would suggest to investors to head to the PowerCo website to have a bit more information. But out of the 3 factories, it's the largest that they're planning right now globally.
Yeah, it's if you think about the total pool of proposed cell capacity through PowerCo, 200 gigawatt hours through the combination of St. Thomas we've just mentioned, but also Valencia in Spain and Salzgitter in Germany. So yeah, they're well advanced in respect of the combination of their objectives and capacity. And I think from memory, Olivier, that the proposal within VW is that PowerCo supplies greater than 50% of the overall cell capacity to the EV platform. So have I got that roughly right?
Yeah, it's going to be roughly half. If I recall, the 450 gigawatt, I think, target for 2030 for Volkswagen, and so you would be right around close to half with PowerCo. With the vertical integration of PowerCo.
Yeah, no, that's well spotted, mate. Because when I think about what 200 gigawatt hours represents from a lithium raw materials point of view, that's well in excess of 2 times Shaakichiuwaanaan's proposed stage 2 capacity. So clearly, their demands will ultimately go well beyond that ultimately could be supplied from a mine as proposed today at Shaakichiuwaanaan, which will produce 800,000 tonnes of spodumene concentrate, or approximately 100,000 tonnes on a lithium carbonate equivalent basis. So clearly their demands go a long way beyond even this relationship with Patriot. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thanks, Olivia and Ken, for that. We'll keep ripping through these questions. With respect to Shaakichiuwaanaan, is there a further resource update coming, and when? And with respect to the VW deal, is this an exclusive partnership, and did you discount other partnerships with other OEMs or not?
Okay, so in respect of other partnerships, well, I think I alluded to that during the presentation, or sorry, it might have been an earlier question. Yes, it's a very important relationship to us. So the combination of PowerCo as an off-taker, VW as an investor, that's an important relationship, but it's not exclusive. We would expect that relationship to grow, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't also be doing other things in respect of the overall supply that would be available from Shaakichiuwaanaan. So I think we can be clear there. Yes, a very important relationship, but not exclusive. Sorry, the first question, Nicholas.
Is there a resource update coming, and when?
Yep, there's one more resource update that contributes to the feasibility study. So that's the one that's derived from all the infill drilling that we did during calendar year 2024. Massive program because it's a big resource. But yes, one more upgrade, and the idea in that upgrade is it's principally about the resource classification. So growing the indicated portion of especially the CV5 resource, because that's what's required to calculate your reserve that will contribute to the final feasibility study. As to the timing of that resource, approximately late in the March quarter.
Fantastic. The next question here is, under the agreement, where will processing of the spodumene concentrate to carbonate or hydroxide take place?
Yeah, I completely understand the obvious inquiry there, but we just can't be definitive. There's going to be a lot more conversation about where the product goes in the short, medium, and the long term. I guess I would just simply double down on the value in a relationship with VW and PowerCo about how we can work together to ensure that that sophisticated Western supply chain emerges over time. And we just can't be definitive about exactly where that product goes in the short term or the medium term. But we really like the idea of working with VW and PowerCo to try and help create what we think is a really important, what's a missing piece of the puzzle, basically, in Western, Western energy markets. We need an alternate supply chain to one that's principally dominated by China. And I think there are key players, that recognise the challenge that represents and are looking to solve it. And we're happy to be a part of that solution.
Thanks, Ken. There was a sort of related question from the same investor. In terms of processing, are we looking at hydroxide or carbonate? Is the market leaning towards carbonate, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, it's partially dependent on what technology you're deploying for the purpose of conversion. So where China and I guess to a certain extent what's now unfolding in Korea has headed is they're going to hydroxide first. And that is a logical place to go with your chemical conversion facility, because you will have a very competitive, cost competitive product for a high-end hydroxide by using the direct conversion of spodumene to hydroxide. And then if you want to participate in carbonate markets, you can twist the hydroxide back to carbonate for a relatively low cost using the carbonation process. So, and there you're talking about hundreds of dollars a tons per ton, $200, $300 per ton, as compared to converting carbonate to hydroxide, which is measured in, the thousands of dollars per ton. So for the spodumene industry, it does seem to make sense to go direct to hydroxide. And yes, you can still participate in carbonate markets, but you're doing it via a process of carbonation from the hydroxide.
Thanks, Ken. While we're on this topic, there's a few questions around it. There's another question here. Given the experience of conversion plants in Australia and their capital costs, does conversion to chemicals in North America make sense? Is the answer an intermediate conversion to sulfate locally?
Yeah. No, I like the direction that question is headed, and I guess broadly speaking, I agree with that thesis. But there's a couple of things that preface my feedback. The first is that the West is still early in the development of these chemical facilities, and yes, it's going to be hard, and especially for the early movers. But that doesn't mean it can't be done, and ultimately that it can't be done both cost effectively and competitively in global markets. So how do you do that? Well, my contention would be you get the world's best resources where the West often, not always, but often has a genuine competitive advantage. So really good raw materials projects. But the reason they're not going direct to the West is that we don't have the chemical capacity. So I think the way for the West to compete is to leverage those really high quality resources, which are ultimately low cost and often more competitive than what's being shipped to China, by spending the money in chemical conversion in Western markets. The combination of a cheap mine with something that arguably in its first life might be slightly more expensive than China, i.e. the chemical conversion facility, the sum of the two is still really competitive, the mine and the chemical plant. And that's actually where the West needs to focus its efforts. And we would argue that's completely consistent with our views around Shaakichiuwaanaan and its cost competitive position, especially once you take into account the high grade nature of the resource, by linking it to cost effective chemical capacity. Should we view the West's chemical conversion industry as abject failure? Absolutely not, in my view. In fact, there will highly likely be successful outcomes. I think the evidence in South Korea is pointing towards POSCO having success. So if they're able to do it, I'm sure there'll be others around the world that can. Midstream products, yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of that model because I do think it solves quite a few of the challenges that the industry might currently experience. There's a very big gap between a miner's expertise and somebody who's producing a pharmaceutical or an ultra high grade, high quality, high end battery ready product. The gap in between is vast, and that's one of the reasons why the industry's found it quite difficult to achieve. It just so happens that China's been doing it for longer, so that's why they've apparently cracked it. But that didn't mean that they did some hard yards back in the day. So how do we partially solve for that? Well, one way you can do it is by considering a midstream product where miners have more expertise to get to that first derivative product. It's not the highest quality product, but it doesn't have to be. The minute you do that, you take quite a bit of the complexity out of the next step. That is the person that's purifying the product, and they can do it in a simple shed in Bécancour or Montreal, So that's why I'm a fan of the midstream model, and it ultimately being an important solution for industry.
Excellent, thanks, Ken. The next question is, what is the status of the Albemarle shareholding? How much do they currently own of Patriot, and do they have any rights not to be diluted? Is Albemarle currently a supplier to VW?
Okay, so I can't be definitive about any supplier relationship between Albemarle and VW, so that's not really my part to play, I guess, in answering that question. I guess they could be, but I don't know. But Albemarle and their participation in our business, well, I can't put words in their mouth, but I do believe they view our project favourably. And I would like to think that they view their shareholding in Patriot favourably. There is no surviving participation rights in respect of that particular shareholding. But in the end, we still value the relationship with Albemarle and look forward to continuing to engage with them, and who knows, maybe work with them in the future, and I hope that ultimately they feel the same way about Patriot and our project. So yeah, I want to say a constructive relationship. We believe they value their shareholding, and I'm not sure about whether there's any pre-existing supplier relationship there.
Okay, thanks, Ken. We're getting through these questions now to the tail end, I think. One more here online. If the project gets a lot bigger over the next 2 years, and for economic reasons you decide to make a larger project, say 1 million tonnes a year, but it doesn't start until after June the 30th, 2031, does PowerCo lose the offtake agreement?
Oh, well, that certainly wouldn't be our intention. No, we'd be doing our best to ensure that we've honoured the terms of the offtake agreement that's been derived. It does contemplate stage 1 capacity fulfilling that obligation. So that would be our first objective. In the event that the mine gets bigger, which I want to say is completely conceivable, because we've still got a lot more exploration to do. But the priority is in the combination of the stage 1 project and the stage 2 project, which would have the effect of fulfilling our offtake obligation to PowerCo.
Fantastic, Ken. Well, look, thanks very much. I think we've dealt with all the online questions, so hopefully we've covered a lot of ground there. That was a tremendous run through. Is there anything that you and Olivia would like to sort of conclude with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'd love to provide a really big shout out to the team at Patriot. We've had a hell of a year. It's been an incredibly busy year. and we've got through a power of work, and now, having that culminate in important relationship with VW and PowerCo feels like the icing on the cake. Now, equity markets haven't necessarily seen it that way, but I'm not using that as the scoreboard, because I do feel like our team has done an amazing job this year, powering through all of the work that ultimately sees our project continue to progress. And having the likes of VW and PowerCo endorse that, to me, is a ringing, a ringing of the bell for the efforts that the team has put in, but also the veracity of the project as a whole. So, well done to the Patriot team, and a huge thank you for all your efforts to get to this point in time. Yeah, really pleased for the results that you've been able to generate this year.
Fantastic. Look, thanks very much, Ken. Thanks, Olivia, for your time this evening in Australia and early morning over there in Canada. Ken, it's perhaps just worth mentioning that you are in Sydney at the moment. You will be hosting, I believe, an Australian analyst call, 9:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time tomorrow. So if there's anyone who is interested in that, please reach out to Olivia or to Ken if you'd like to jump on that call. And Ken, I'm sure you'll facilitate any other contact with market participants as they requested over the coming days.
Absolutely, Nick. I look forward to it.
Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. We will ensure that a recording of this webinar is made available in a timely fashion in the coming hours, and we appreciate your attendance on this very important occasion for Patriot Battery Metals. So thank you both to Ken and Olivia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we wish you all the best for the festive season. Thank you, and see you again next year.